With the release of the final season of Infinity, and with no immediate machinima projects to concentrate on, I thought it would be interesting to do a series of behind the scenes videos on all of my Destiny machinima projects, in a similar manner to the behind the scenes video I did for my Star Wars Revan film. We are going to be going in order of release date here, so this first video is going to cover the production release of Crota's Bane, which was the first ever Destiny machinima project that I worked on. So the story starts in April 2016, which at the time of recording this voiceover is over 6 years ago. Bungie, in a reveal stream, unveiled a feature that allowed the player to turn off their HUD, allowing for cinematic video and screenshots. At this point, I had only been making machinima for about 5 months or so. In December of the previous year, 2015, I made a short machinima in Halo 3. That short isn't publicly available anymore, but I'd made it with a friend, Daniel, who also played Destiny, and we came up with the idea of making a feature-length Destiny machinima project together, with both of us co-directing. The problem, as with Knights of the Old Republic a year later, was solving the technical challenge of creating cinematics out of a game that was never really intended for that purpose. Again, I started off making machinima in Halo 3, which does have dedicated tools for making that kind of content, whereas Destiny does not. So the first question that we had to ask ourselves as the April update was coming out was whether what we were trying to do, what we were hoping to do, would even be possible. To give credit where credit is definitely due, it was My Name is Bife's short Consequences and his subsequent video showing off the glitch that allowed you to remove your gun from sight that kind of definitively gave me the answers that I was looking for. Namely that on a purely technical level, it was going to actually be possible to create machinima in Destiny. I should incidentally point out that me and Daniel were definitely not the first people to come up with the idea of making Destiny machinima. Before the HUD options were even a thing, Husky Raid were making Destiny co-ops using clever cropping and staging to hide as many of the in-game elements as possible. The fact that Crota's Bane took a year and a half to make also meant that other directors managed to get a head start on us, the most notable examples being Digital Curse's Fireteam Weasel and Tempest Knight's Rift. Rift in particular does share some similarity in terms of its characterisation with some of my later work, although this doesn't really apply to Crota's Bane at all. The only reason I mention all of this is to try and convey some sort of sense of the circumstances in which we were working at the time. By around early 2017 or so, enough machinima content had been made that a small community was beginning to form, but we largely were oblivious to this, and we kind of worked within our own small unit. To that end, including me and Daniel, there were only ever 4 people who took part in the actual physical filming in-game, one of whom was only present for a couple of sessions. This meant that the vast majority of the film was shot with a crew of just 3 people, which imposed immediate technical limitations. Take a look at the scene from Phoenix Rising, which was made under much better conditions. There are 6 characters in a single shot, which makes for 7 Guardians in total, including the cameraman. Contrast that with Crota's Bane. Almost the entire film has just 2 characters, or 3 if the scene is shot from Toland's third-person sword perspective. There are 6 main characters, which means that a lot of the dialogue scenes with 4 or 5 characters, a lot of the scenes that were taken, for example, from the Grimoire cards, had to be split over multiple filming sessions with a lot of intercutting to create the effect of multiple people in a scene. This is actually one of the aspects that I thoroughly dislike about Crota's Bane, because once you realise that you never see more than 3 characters on screen at once, the whole illusion collapses. While we're on the subject of illusions, the body actor for Eris is actually a male Guardian because we only had 1 female hunter, and that was for Sai Mota. It's amazing how unnoticeable the effect is. I think it's mostly down to machinima characters being so limited in their body language that they tend to rely heavily on voices and voice actors to convey their character. With every other machinima project I've ever done, The first thing I ever did was write the script, and this is for very good reason. Writing a script allows you to focus on the story, it allows you to cast voice actors early, it allows you to devise a structure and a plan for filming, and it prevents you from descending into an unfocused, disorganised mess. Whenever anyone asks me for advice on how to make machinima or how to go about it, the first thing I always tell them is start with the script. With all that being said, the script for Crota's Bane wasn't written until several months into the shooting. We started off by writing a plot synopsis during around May of 2016, by which point we'd already been experimenting with shooting little bits and pieces of the project for a few weeks. The synopsis guided us for the next few months while the script was being written. I wrote the script alone, basing it heavily on the Grimoire cards. This was for two reasons. Firstly, to make it as accurate as possible to the lore, and secondly, because at that point I wasn't confident enough to write an entire feature-length project without including any source material. The scenes that aren't copied from the Grimoire, the ones I wrote myself, aka most of the film, are fairly shoddily written with bare-bones exposition-y dialogue and wooden phrasing, and reading the script back now, which I had to do to write the script for this behind-the-scenes video, I'm slightly cringing how much worse I was at script writing back then. However, the script was perfunctory enough and usable enough that I considered it a decent job, and so that is what we went about shooting with. The shooting of Crota's Bane took a year and a half. The reasons for this were complicated. Firstly, there are essentially two versions of the film. The first version was shot on the Xbox 360 version of Destiny using a dedicated capture card. This version, as you can see on screen, has different designs for the characters, especially Eris, who looks much weirder in the 360 version of the film than the finished project. The capture card that we used also slightly compressed the video, which along with the Xbox 360's rubbish graphics is why the 360 footage looks so blurry and low quality. However, because we had absolutely no clue what we were doing, we shot most of the footage of the actual film on the Xbox 360 in a couple of months before the script had really been finalised. Then, when we discovered the game's VR features in the Xbox One, we decided to switch to that instead. Given the radically improved graphics, we decided that it would be much quicker and easier and better to simply reshoot the entire thing, and we took the opportunity to make a few tweaks. We changed a lot of the character designs, and we also made a few changes to the script as well. There are a few things that remained the same though, namely my habit of filming fight scenes from Toland's third-person sword perspective. While the sword itself changed, the cinematography didn't, and it gives Crota's Bane a unique feel, I think. That third-person perspective allowed me to run around for extended periods of time without having to worry about a camera following me, and it also gave the film an unusual sense of fluidity because there's no cuts. If you look at a lot of the Abyss section, or Bridge section, or the Deathslinger for example, a lot of the shots that are from Toland's third-person sword perspective go on for, 40 seconds, a minute and a half, which is quite a long time without any edits. This style of shooting isn't something that I ever really chose to repeat again, except on the smallest of scales, because after Crota's Bane I wanted to kind of hone my cinematography, and I pursued a more sort of polished overall effect, but I still enjoy looking back at Crota's Bane and the slightly messy camera work of it. It lends it a more authentic quality somehow, I think, as if a lot of the artifice of filmmaking has been stripped out of it. Meanwhile, with a new shoot on the Xbox One came new problems. Most of the scenes before the raid were actually pretty straightforward to shoot because most of them are discussion scenes, and even the combat scenes were typically done in one take with the camera clumsily following the action, and judicious editing being used to cover any glaring mistakes. The Drakes' fight that you can see on screen is probably the best example of this. Almost all of the footage is from one single filming session. Again, the notion of actually planning shoots and planning shots seemed not to really occur to us at the time, because we didn't really bother to think about frame composition or shot structure or how we would edit the film or any of the formal features that you would normally see in a proper film. For the discussion scenes, our standard practice was actually just to record a whole lot of shots for each character talking and then pray that we had enough shots to cover every dialogue line. And when we didn't, we'd often just reuse the same shot once or twice. We got away with this, barely, because the characters' heads don't move while they're talking. It would take until season 3 of Infinity before I caught on to that idea. But like I said earlier, all of this is the easy part. The hard part was when we had to film in the raid. See, we didn't shoot Crota's Bane in chronological order. In fact, we shot it in whatever random order we felt like, and this made getting checkpoints a chore. Because I was the only crew member who really played Destiny recreationally, it was always my responsibility to source the checkpoints for filming by soloing Crota's End up to the relevant checkpoint. For the finale scenes with Crota, this usually meant doing almost the entire raid alone up to the Crota checkpoint. And considering how many filming sessions it took for Crota's Bane to be shot, this involved a lot of running that raid. It took such a long time that when Bungie released the final April update for Destiny, in April of 2017 with the remastered raids, the changes they made to the bridge encounter slowed me down massively, because instead of soloing that section in about 10 minutes, it would now take me probably around 40 minutes, or longer if I was having an off day. The raid setting also posed problems for the body actors. I was almost always the cameraman, either in the actual camera mode, or body acting as Toland in the third-person sword perspective. This meant that my other body actors usually had to shoulder the burden of actually being in combat for the combat scenes, and even though we always used the level 30 version of Crota's End, dying to enemies was still common and dangerous. The Stills Abyss was probably the worst section of the entire raid, because you had to keep moving, otherwise you couldn't survive. Unfortunately, my body actors didn't really play Destiny in their spare time in the same way that I did, and this meant that they weren't quite as adept at me at navigating the maze, which made filming quite difficult. All of the Abyss footage with Eris, Eriana or Saimota was shot either at the first 1 or 2 lamps, or at the bridge plate at the end of the section. The strategy to film at the bridge plate, by the way, involved me continuing through the Abyss alone, and then when I got to the bridge plate, I'd activate it, go back through the Abyss, backwards, resurrect my body actors, and from there we'd run back to the bridge and I'd maybe capture a good half-minute of footage before everybody would all die again. The scenes of characters actually crossing the bridge and going into the light were filmed in the Last Rite story mission because there's no enemies there. The bridge encounter was shot in a similar manner, with my ability to solo the raid being used to drag my teammates along and in between resurrecting them and actually doing the raid, I'd try and capture as much footage as I could. The Crota fight was particularly irritating to film because of the Chalice of Light mechanic, but by that point most of the characters were either dead or dying, so it actually wasn't too arduous. One thing I should also point out was the sheer level of reshoots and overdubs, or insert shots, that were needed. Scenes like the Draxus fight and Venus were filmed in a single take, like I said earlier, but almost every other scene is an amalgamation of at least 2 or 3 different filming sessions, or probably more actually, sometimes taking place months apart from each other. The bridge encounter, for example, is strung together from 20 separate video clips, with most of these video clips being taken from different recording sessions on different days. Even right at the end of the editing process, I was still going back into Destiny by myself to shoot little establishing shots or pickups as needed. We didn't have any kind of a schedule, so it was sometimes hard to know what we'd shot and what we hadn't. I think we shot 1 or 2 scenes twice by accident. There was one scene which we actually forgot to film in our disorganised rush. As you might expect from a shoot that did not go too smoothly, the editing of Crota's Bane was hideously complicated. Like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we had a lot of individual video clips shot, and none of it was very well organised, to be honest. We'd split the film up into 19 individual scenes, not counting the credits, which helped us organise somewhat, but sifting through badly renamed files was still a monumental effort. What definitely didn't help either was the fact that I edited the project in Windows Movie Maker. Now, I do like Windows Movie Maker as a concept, and if you're a 10-year-old child wanting to glue together some home movie footage, then it works just fine. But on anything slightly more serious, then it has serious issues. You can only cut to every third frame, all the times are measured in seconds for some bizarre reason, and the actual editing engine is a buggy disaster that keeps crashing and creating frame glitches. This is what I had to edit my entire project on. It was a lot of work to get all the video hoisted in the right position and make sure that none of it was actually broken, and because we'd split the film into 19 scenes, and because I edited each scene with the voice lines on top of it, and then edited all the scenes together, this meant that I had to render each piece of video footage twice, and considering that I exported the video as Windows Movie Maker's default high quality setting, which has quite a low bitrate, the final project ended up actually looking fairly compressed and low quality at times. As for the music, the original cut of Crota's Bane only had a couple of tracks of music, all sourced from the Destiny soundtrack, which I downloaded off the internet. The music was added in a kind of rush at the last stage of editing, and I didn't spend a lot of time mixing it, so in the original cut the audio levels are quite unbalanced, which is just one of many, many issues that the original cut has. The original cut of Crota's Bane was uploaded towards the end of August 2017, just before the release of Destiny 2, actually. After sitting down to watch it in full, I realised that it had a number of technical and artistic issues. A large number of technical and artistic issues. So I went about trying to fix them. I added more establishing shots, more insert shots, I trimmed the fight scenes a little bit. In particular, I cut down in the bridge fight scene because the original version of that went on for ages. I also added quite a lot more music to make sure that essentially every scene was properly scored, which massively improved the watchability of the film, I think. Even so, there are still areas of improvement. There's an entire scene that I scripted that takes place just before the raid that doesn't make it into either cut of the film because I just forgot to add it in. There's still frame glitches and pacing issues and technical faults and difference in video quality between scenes and shots and reused shots. In short, it's still a complete mess. Crota's Bane was the first major machinima project that I ever did, and even though there are a lot of problems with it, I still think that the scale of what we managed to accomplish was quite impressive. Me and Daniel had absolutely no idea what we were doing, but we kept on persevering even after our initial excitement and enthusiasm had worn off. That being said, towards the very end of the shoot, we were all pretty fed up with Crota's Bane and Crota's End, myself in particular because I was the one running Crota's End to get checkpoints. I was also increasingly taking on more and more of a sole director role, as Daniel was becoming increasingly dispirited and our other body actor was becoming less available for filming sessions. Even so, despite the fact that I essentially did complete the final stages of the shoot alone, projects like these are never really possible with just one person, and to end on an optimistic note, I want to thank everyone who helped in any way, shape or form. Crota's Bane might not be a flawless award-winning masterpiece, but it still stands as a strong first work, I think, and I hope my cast and crew can be as proud of it as I am.